Well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Matrone. I'm the Associate Director of the Office of Career and Professional Development. And welcome to our October Alumni Career Path session. This month we'll be talking about careers in science policy. And we're welcoming 3 alumni to this event. We have with us this afternoon and to answer some questions from us and from all of you. We have Jiggy Geronimo, who's Executive Director of the Independent Strategic Research Collaborative, also a neuroscience program alumna. Clio Korn, who is a policy fellow with the California Council on Science and Technology, a postdoc alumna, and Matthew Wilson, who is a senior staff associate in the Office of the Director at the National Science Foundation, and also a postdoc alumnus. One of the purposes of this event is to help those who are interested in this career to connect with those who do this on a daily basis. So we want to kind of lower that activation energy or that barrier for you to contact them. So we included some easy way for you to contact any of our panelists today, either through LinkedIn or through email. So please feel free to contact them afterward should you want to connect and learn more through like an informational interview. And so, thank you, the 3 of you, for joining us today. Before we jump into the panel, just a little bit about what this program is and some of the resources that surround it. So if this is the first time you've joined us, this program is a collaboration between multiple entities or offices at UCSF, clearly from the Office of Career and Professional Development, but we also collaborate with the Office of Alumni Relations and a registered campus organization, the Black Excellence in STEM group. And a lot of this program stemmed from a graduate student-led organization that existed prior to COVID. This was the PhD Alumni Career Series, where graduate students would invite alumni from their programs to talk about their career paths. So that was the grassroots effort that kind of spawned this program. And why do we do programs like this? We want to highlight to all of you that careers for PhDs, no matter what the path is, are successful ones. We're trying to get rid of the stigma that non-academic careers are less than academic careers. And we feel that it should just be careers and that they're all equal. We want to demonstrate that representation matters in these careers. So our first pass for invitations for careers for events like this are always Black scientists or scientists of color. We want to highlight their voices and identities. And then last, we want to be, like I said earlier, we want to be able to provide a forum that kind of lowers the barrier for you to connect with people whom you may not know, but who have similar experiences to you. So someone who formerly was at UCSF, like you are now, that can talk about their experience here and how they got into their careers where they are now. This isn't just the only part of this event. So we ask all of our panelists to answer a survey of 6 common questions. We call this resource the fundamentals, and you can find it on the every month pages or the alumni career paths pages for all of our programs in every month. And so look for this resource after our event today, which we will also upload the recording of this event too for those who would like to access it afterward, or if you were unable to see it during the live event. How we're going to run with today, we're doing introducing you right now. We're going to do a little bit of intro to what UCSF Connect is, which is a resource that we have here at UCSF to help connect our current students and postdocs with alumni. From there, we'll jump into a moderated Q&A, after which we'll end the recording and allow all of you who are in attendance to ask your questions. You can do so if you feel comfortable unmuting your video and audio and ask it live, but also feel free to submit your questions to I or one of my fellow colleagues here who would be more than happy to ask that question on your behalf. And then we'll wrap up at about 5:30 the 5 o'clock hour Pacific time. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank all of the people that make this possible. So these are all of the collaborators, both current and former, who brought this program to life. So thank you to all of you who make this possible. So with that, I'm going to stop share. I'm going to hand over the microphone to Katie Maloney, who's Senior Director of Alumni Relations, and she'll talk and introduce you briefly to UCSF Connect.
Thanks, Mike. My name is Katie Maloney. I work in the alumni office, and I also support UCSF Connect, which is our online networking community just for UCSF Connect. I've just put the link to the community in the chat box. I also put the link to a really great web page that UCOP has put together with a lot of resources about UCSF Connect, as well as how to think about organizing and sending out a request for an informational interview. So I encourage you to, one, join UCSF Connect, and two, also check out that web page with those resources. I'm going to share my screen and show you what it looks like inside UCSF Connect, and show you how I would search for alumni who work in science policy if I was doing that search in the directory. I logged in using my access email and password, or login and password, to get into UCSF Connect. But you can also, when you register to join, sync up your LinkedIn login and password, or just use your email and create a password. So however you like, and then that's how you can continue to sign in each time. The most important tool is the directory. We have over 4,600 users in UCSF Connect. They're alumni, current students, postdocs, faculty, staff, and residents and fellows. So, everyone is welcome to join the community, and we really encourage them to do this. Since science policy isn't something you major in at UCSF, how would you go about finding it? And there's a couple of approaches I would do. One thing you could do is start with affiliation and maybe pick alumni and postdoc alumni, just to narrow the search down in one way. Then I'd go here to work experience, and I'd go to industry. And believe it or not, one of the industries that alumni can select is science policy. So not everyone picks an industry when they register to join. So it's a small group that we have here, but that's a nice manageable size group of alumni that you could look into their profiles, see if where they're working is of interest to you, and message them to ask to connect and ask questions. I'm going to uncheck science policy, but then see here, as people are signing up, they indicate ways they're willing to help, and then also under mentoring, ways they're willing to mentor. And don't get hung up by the word mentoring. If someone has indicated they're willing to look at your CV or your resume, think of it in those terms that we've defined them there. Another way I'd look for science policy is to go here in the keyword search and just put in science policy. And that got us 9 users. So that's, where someone has put that phrase science policy somewhere into their profile. Does it mean that that's what they're doing in this moment, or that it's the right fit for who you'd like to connect with? You will have to do some different tiered searches to kind of find and look at different profiles. But this does give you sort of a good starting point to find users who are working at places that may be of interest. Another thought is to search by the company name. Perhaps it's the National Institutes of Health. You could see who's working there. Perhaps, someone is working in policy there. That could be something that you could do. Or look for other institutions that where science policy is a key part. Search by that company name, or even put, again, in the company name here in the keyword search. So that's a quick overview of how we look for science policy alumni. And, if I was to go into someone's profile, I could click the message button and, write a short message to ask them if they would have time to answer questions via email, or maybe it would be a coffee or a 20-minute Zoom or phone call, and learn more about their careers. So please do that. This community is opt-in. And so if someone has joined, it is because they are willing to help. And so don't hesitate to reach out to them. One other tool I am going to show you within the community is the Alumni Career Paths group, which you are very welcome to join. The members directory, it's a smaller directory of the larger one, but this does include alumni, staff, faculty, and other users who have served as panelists or support the Alumni Career Paths programming. So definitely use this as a place to find former panelists of this program, and you can reach out to them here. So I will stop there, but I'm happy to answer any questions in the chat or when we do the Q&A at the very, very end of the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. It really is a great resource for all of you. As it was clearly indicated there that people who are willing to help you, it's something that you don't find on something like LinkedIn. So I see it very often. There's the level of apprehension about reaching out to someone that you don't know, have never talked to randomly. And so this really just shows that these friendly people willing to help and give you advice. So I highly encourage you to join
Absolutely.
that resource.
And our alumni today who came, we reached out to them
yes.
without knowing, and they said yes. So thank you so much to our alumni who are here today. And I think it is a very clear example of how alumni are very much willing to talk about their careers and help you as you're making your decisions.
Indeed. So with that, let's get started with our moderated Q&A. My colleague Jasmine King and I are going to ping pong questions back and forth. And so we're going to start with a very broad question that Matthew was willing to answer, but of course, Jiggy and Clio, feel free to join in too. And just for those who are exploring this career for the first time, can you tell us what is science policy, or just generally what is a policy career? What does that mean, at least each of you?
Yeah, well, thanks for the invitation to join this panel. I'm quite honored and happy to participate. So one of my mentors and friends, Kelvin Drogemeyer, he was fond of defining it kind of in a bifurcated way, and that is policy for science and science for policy. And I'll talk about each of those. So policy for science, I think of as the priorities, rules, guidelines, and such that govern the conduct of science and research. So this could be animal or human research policies, funding, priorities, and budgets. I personally think of budget as policy. The criteria we'll use the NIH or NSF to decide what to fund, all in support of national goals. So these are the policies that govern science. Science for policy is the act of applying scientific knowledge and scientific consensus to the development of public policies. So science policy worker, somebody as myself, would consider data, ethical, political dimensions of a various public policy issue and determine what science has to offer. What do the facts say? How can science and technology best serve the public?
Thank you so much for that, Matthew. Jiggy or Clio, do you have anything to add? Perhaps Jiggy, I know you don't do science policy per se, it's more public policy more broadly. So anything to add or anything different from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just there's a lot that science has and the scientific method have to offer to the realm of policymaking. So I guess I would just expand that definition to kind of all of that, just data research and how that, and data-driven decision making in terms of making decisions about policy.
Thank you. Clio, if not, that's fine too.
No, I would agree. I really appreciated Matt's definition, and to completely agree with Jiggy that it kind of expands out from there. And just, from my fellowship program this year, I can tell you that all of the fellows who came from a scientific background, I mean, we are science fellows, but we are working on a huge range of topics, some of which are obviously related to science, some of which are not. And the skills and the insights we're bringing are as much about kind of our general evidence-based approach and the kind of critical thinking approach you develop as a scientist, as much as any subject-specific knowledge. So it really can ramify out very broadly.
Thank you, all three of you. So why don't we jump into more personal Q&A? So Jasmine, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll actually be starting off this question with Clio, and definitely Jiggy and Matt, you can chime in wherever you feel like you would like to add anything. So please tell us more about your career story from grad school to your current role. And this could include anything of where you studied, what you studied, your training, and like any other factors that you felt were really important with getting you to the current position that you're in.
Thanks, Jasmine. So I trained as a neuroscientist. I did a neuroscience major in undergrad, and then I went abroad and I actually did my graduate work in the UK at the University of Oxford, which I really loved. I loved doing the research over there. But it was actually while I was getting my PhD in the UK that I started getting interested in science policy. I was kind of getting involved in a lot of science communication ventures, writing a blog with some friends, doing other things to write about science for a broad audience, getting involved in public engagement, like presenting it at museums. And my mentors flagged up for me that there was an opportunity to do a science policy internship during my PhD through my funding program. So I ended up interning at the Academy of Medical Sciences in London, which is similar to the national academies that we have here in the US. And I worked with their policy team and really caught the policy bug. I got to go to Parliament in Westminster and sit in on committee hearings and help organize workshops, be in these meetings with lots of different stakeholders, people from academia and industry, and from patient advocacy groups, all sorts of different perspectives. And I found that so fascinating. So I went back to finish my PhD, and I was still intending to stay in research, but I thought I definitely want to weave science policy into my career. So when I moved back to the US, to California, to do my postdoc at UCSF, I immediately tried to get involved in science policy activities and to sort of catch up on what was the policy landscape here in the US and in California specifically. I got very involved with the science policy group at UCSF. I know some of you are in the audience. It's great to see you guys. And that was an amazing way for me to help organize events like this one, and therefore meet the speakers and network with them, participate in workshops and skills training programs, do advocacy days in Sacramento, practice policy writing. So all of that kind of built over the course of my postdoc. And eventually I got to the point where I realized that I saw my future going full-time into policy rather than staying in research. And I had discovered this fellowship program through the California Council on Science and Technology, which places PhD scientists and engineers in California's government for a year of public service. I knew I wanted to build my career here in California because that's home. So that was kind of the clear path for me to make the leap from research into policy. And I've had the most amazing year. I've been placed at the California Air Resources Board, which is part of California's Environmental Protection Agency. It's responsible for regulating air pollution, particularly from cars and trucks and other mobile sources of pollution. And it also leads California's climate policy. So it has been a huge subject matter leap for me from neuroscience into climate policy, but I've loved every second of it. So I will stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Clio. Jiggy, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself? And then we can move on to Matt.
Yeah. So when I was a graduate student, I also was in neuroscience at UCSF, and somewhere in my maybe third or fourth year, I sort of started realizing that I wanted probably to leave academia and do work that I felt had sort of more immediate like impact that I could tangibly like feel in my day to day. So I actually got really interested in teaching. So I was teaching. I was kind of doing a lot of career exploration. I did the Mind program, lots of stuff like that, and had done a lot of teaching. And then around the same time, just kind of like organically became an activist. So this was kind of like around when Trump was elected. Really felt like I needed to get involved and do something. So I really started out just kind of on the side, volunteering as a grassroots activist. I joined like a local grassroots group. And just, I went to like legislative visits with Senate staff. I like protested outside of Dianne Feinstein's office. And then living in got really actually irritated with national politics and found a lot of opportunity being in California. And knowing that we have a legislature that often aligns with my values and it is able to pass sort of progressive policies. So I got really into sort of California state legislative advocacy. I sort of just started following the legislature as an activist. I kind of like taught myself how to read bills and follow bills and used to watch committee hearings and submit comments. And started kind of like organizing other grassroots groups across the state and sort of founded a like volunteer coalition of grassroots groups across California to do California state legislative advocacy. This was all like while I was doing my PhD, just kind of on the side, and hadn't actually even realized that that was something one could do as a career, like really saw it as a hobby initially. And then the national grassroots group Indivisible, someone sent me a job posting for a state and local policy manager. And I was just wrapping up my PhD. And so I just applied like with no expectation that I would get the job because I had no professional experience doing policy, but obviously had been doing a lot of volunteer work and sort of activism for years. And then got the job. And I remember during the interview, they asked me, like, you don't have any professional experience, like, tell us why we should hire you. I talked about how we need database decision-making in our policy and how there's a lot of sort of transferable skills, which there absolutely are. And so they hired me and they said specifically that they hired me because I was a scientist and that I brought a kind of a different and unique perspective. I wasn't just one of the sort of, got a master's in public policy or a law degree and went into politics. The fact that I had a sort of unique background was appealing. And that was really my foot in the door into sort of professional politics. So I worked at Indivisible for a few years. I ran their grassroots state advocacy program. So I was kind of teaching grassroots activists how to kind of engage with their state legislature, how to read bills, how to follow bills, lots of kind of training for activists, and then got really into voting rights and then moved over to an organization called Voting Rights Lab, where I was working in kind of 10 different states to try to pass pro voter policies. So got a lot more exposed in that role to sort of kind of lobbying and communications and sort of the other aspects outside of grassroots activism that go into sort of politics and policy making. And at that time is actually when I kind of came back to doing research, a sort of different type of research. I started doing public opinion research on voting policies and messaging around voting policies. And then in the process of the 2020 election, where obviously it was a very contentious, contested election, started working on kind of helping the larger progressive movement align around research and messaging, and sort of discovered there was this gap with people all across the movement doing different research, but not really sharing it with each other. And so earlier this year, sort of turned that effort into its own organization where we help all of the research across the progressive ecosystem sort of coordinate and share with each other so that all of the research is kind of creating the best insights for everyone. And that's where I am now. So it's been a journey.
Yes, it is. But you've made it. Thank you for that. Matt, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. It's tough to follow such great and impressive stories of the other panelists. So I went to the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, where I was a biomedical scientist, and I studied a form of a basic signal, cell signal transduction in a form of leukemia. From there, in 2005, I went to UCSF in the lab of Dr. Thea Tilsty, where I studied epigenetics and breast cancer. And throughout all that time, I realized I liked research, but I didn't love it. There were days and moments, of publishing your first paper or other sort of things worked out where I felt that passion come alive. But there were too many days that were tough and that I didn't like it, and didn't really realize how much. Until we used to do, I don't know if they still do this, like we had laboratory journal clubs where you would present a research paper, a prominent research paper in a related field that either you're studying or the lab studying. And for one of the, and I loathe these. I'm old enough, far enough away, I can say that I did not like doing these. And but for one of them, around that time, it was George W. Bush, and there were a lot of debates about embryonic stem cell research. And so there were policies in place where a lot of labs had like 2 centrifuges because you couldn't use the one on federal dollars to do embryonic stem cell research. This was a fairly contentious topic at the time. And some research had come out on methods that may have alleviated some of the ethical concerns around them. So I actually presented on the science, but then the ethics involved, and I really enjoyed it. I prepared days in advance. Some of my colleagues expected me to take a particular point of view, and I tried to present both sides and talk about different people's perspectives, whether it's sort of religious conservatives or other scientists, and brought it together and talked about how the science was kind of interwoven to this, and I just loved it. And a colleague of mine came up to me afterwards and said, Matt, you can get paid for this. And I had no idea that you could, you could actually, I was very much in the ivory tower. I was binoculars on, or, kind of blindfold, looking at myopically at my research, sort of ignorant to that broader policy landscape. So I went to a talk by Bruce Alberts, and he talked about AAAS Science and Technology Fellowship Program, AAAS American Association for the Advancement of Science. Some of you may be familiar with the program. And this is a program, much like the one Clio talked about, that brings scientists, whether it's newly minted PhDs or postdocs or people mid-career even, tenured faculty, to Washington, D.C. to work for the federal government. And so it can be executive branch, State Department, NIH, NSF, DOD, so on, EPA. There's also fellowships on the Hill, so you can work the House or Senate. And I think they have ones in the judicial branch now as well. So I applied and actually had the support of Thea, which was great. I mean, as during the introduction, they talked about some of the stigma, and that's definitely out there. I mean, I think the stigma that I faced was my own personal stigma of leaving the bench. But took kind of this leap and applied, was fortunate enough to get it and got a placement at the National Science Foundation within the Office of the National Science Board. The National Science, so NSF is kind of unique in that it has a director and a board that kind of govern the agency. Most agencies just have a director or, a cabinet secretary. And so I served this National Science Board, which was 24 prominent academics or in the private sector, tenured faculty, some of the top scientists in the world really serving on this, and staffed them as a fellow from 2008 to 2010. Applied for a federal job and was lucky enough to get that. So became basically a Fed up until 2019. I was one of the National Science Board members was Kelvin Drogemeyer, who was then brought on by President Trump to be science advisor, director of Office of Science and Technology Policy. So we knew each other, we're friendly. So he brought me on as a federal employee there. So I went on temporary assignment to the White House from 2019 until the election, and then returned back to my home agency. And instead of going back to the National Science Board, I now work on the other side of the house for the director, Setharaman Panchanathan, where I'm kind of a policy advisor to him and the senior leadership team at NSF. So I love it. I missed research a little more than I thought I would, but it's been an incredible experience that I wouldn't trade for the world. And I've learned a ton, and have been able to make a difference in hopefully in some way.
Wow, thank you for that, Matt. Y'all all have just amazing stories, and y'all have truly blown me away to just hear all of the achievements that y'all have made in this science policy space, and knowing that y'all were once researchers and like we are. So it's amazing. I'll pass the next question on to Mike.
Thanks, Jasmine. And I'll just, second what Jasmine says. I love hearing these stories, and I mean, they're reaffirming for my own story, but I think for those who are joining us, some of you may be feeling a little guilty if you're not exploring a faculty career, which is very common. So I hope that stories like this can show that there are others who also are not, and who have not followed, the path that is kind of communicated to you during your graduate studies or your postdoc studies. So thank you to the three of you for just sharing those stories with us. So this next question, that was for Jiggy, and I would, for those in the audience, could you talk about what it's like to navigate your company or a client or a field space with the identity that you hold? So what major challenges do you face? And what can those who are looking to get into this career face, and what do they expect? So our aim for this kind of question is like, we want to help people identify companies or spaces where they feel like their identity is heard and valid, and where they're going to be respected. So
yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think one thing that has frustrated me as a brown woman in the progressive movement is that you think that by entering sort of politics, and especially sort of progressive politics, that, you're not going to face maybe quite as much of the same sort of like issues and barriers that one does elsewhere. But the truth is that white supremacy is infiltrated every institution. It is part of our culture. And so it is not absent from those spaces either. And it shouldn't be surprising, like a lot of the big name political consultants are primarily white and male. If you look at our representatives, they're primarily white and male. And so there is, that is the truth. However, it is better than a lot of other places. So I think one of the things that myself and other sort of women of color face is when you are in more sort of established institutions in politics. I think it is like a little bit more of an issue because sort of the longer standing institutions tend to really have sort of entrenched inequities that are hard to uproot. So I think sort of newer organizations, ones that are more focused on organizing, ones that are more sort of led by younger people, led by people of color, are going to be more likely to sort of embody the values. And so I guess my advice would be, to like maybe not go for the like super well-established big name institutions, but also to really interrogate the values of the place that you are considering working. So, especially if you're working like I do in progressive politics, most organizations have their values, and if equity is not one of them, I think that that's sort of a red flag. So I guess it's complicated. There's obvious challenges. I'm not going to say that there's not challenges, because these are challenges that you face in every workplace if you are from a marginalized identity. But there are spaces that are better than others.
Thank you, Jiggy. I appreciate the candor, certainly. Jasmine, would you like to ask our next question?
Yes, and this is a related question, and I will be giving this one to Clio. So what major challenges did you or do you face, and what can those entering this space expect?
I think probably the biggest challenge from this year specifically, as I've kind of made the formal leap into policy from academia, has just been sort of jumping into really new territory. Like I said, I completely left behind neuroscience and entered not only a new policy space, but a new scientific space of climate and environmental work. So it's just meant kind of learning very fast. But that's what we're trained to do in our PhDs. I remember there was a point in my PhD where it kind of hit me that I was just gaining a skill of having confidence in facing a problem that I had no idea how to solve and saying, yeah, but I'm going to be able to figure out how to do that. I'm going to find people to ask questions. I'm going to do some research online. I'm going to, find the information I need to figure this problem out. And hopefully that's something that all of you are or have sort of developed and worked that muscle during your graduate work, because it's something that's so key to the training that we do. And that's the same kind of thing you apply going into a new field, even if it's really, really different topic-wise and a totally different atmosphere. The other thing is just sort of taking on a lot of responsibility. So my placement at the California Air Resources Board, I'm specifically placed in the office of the chair who leads the agency. And this year I came in right at the same time as a new chair. So it was a really exciting moment to be there, but also a moment with a lot of turnover of staff in the office. And that created a space for me to kind of step up and take on a lot of responsibilities, which was amazing. And it has kind of opened up experiences and career paths for me, but it was also a lot to take on. I was responsible for preparing the chair for events, writing speeches and talking points, prepping briefing materials. And, she's speaking on a very public stage to a lot of people. So if I didn't, meet the goals, the consequences were much bigger. It felt like than the kinds of things I faced in lab, where the number of people impacted was smaller. The scale of the impact was smaller. So that was a challenge as well, but it was also one I felt ready to take on. And I think that's because it was really an accumulation of all the experiences that I'd had up to that point, all of the science policy and science communication and engagement at kind of extracurriculars that I did throughout my graduate training and postdoc really helped prepare me. It kind of made me familiar enough with the world that I was stepping into that I was kind of ready to take that leap. And my scientific experience really helped too. And I would say this maybe particularly for postdocs in the audience. You might wonder if you're, in a postdoc, but now you're thinking of veering off the academic path. Have I wasted my time doing a postdoc? Like, should I have exited right after a PhD? And, absolutely fine if you want to leave right after a PhD and step onto a non-academic path, but it's also valuable to do the postdoc too, in my experience. That gives you more years of kind of growing in independence and leading projects and taking on more responsibilities. That is really valuable when you do step off onto a new career path, if you choose to do that. So just something to keep in mind for the postdocs.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Clio. And just in respect for time, if you have nothing to add, Matt, in terms of your challenges that you have that you faced, I'll pass it on to Mike.
Yeah, no, we can move on.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Jasmine. I think I want to touch on something that Jiggy said for our next question. And it's something that in one-on-one appointments with students and postdocs, I stress strongly is like, what are your values? Because values have a strong influence on your career happiness and the path that you take. I think it's even more important that your values are met in a career as opposed to the skills and the interests that you are pursuing too, because if your values aren't met, even if you're doing things you'd like to do, you're going to be miserable. And so I'm going to start with Matt and we'll go backward order this time. Can you talk about like what are your values now? The alternative is can you give some perspective of what were your values when you kind of made this change into science policy? Just so those in the audience can identify if they have shared values with you as well. And how did that influence your career decisions?
Yeah, I think that a common thread between sort of my laboratory career and my career in science policy is I wanted to help people. That was the overarching goal. I was good at science. The idea of making discoveries that could improve people's lives was, it's a powerful force. I think for me, that got a little bit lost in the day-to-day and week-to-week challenge and rigor and the professional and personal challenges at that time of my life was, it was a difficult time for me. And I think not really being happy or not having my values met. I mean, I can look back and see that. I don't think I realized that at the time. I just felt unhappy. So hopefully people don't identify with that part. But I think like the politics side, I got interested in politics in the lead up to the Iraq War, which, I approached like a scientist and I said, I don't see the evidence for WMDs, and this is going to lead to massive suffering and resources. And it's, but I saw that as kind of an aside, right? I didn't connect the two, like I said in my opening answer. So this overarching value was helping people, and I thought I could do that through science. I think I also wanted to be successful in that. I wanted to be to really make a difference in science. I didn't want to be a mediocre science, and to be frank, I saw that as ahead of me, that I was good at it, but I didn't have that passion, as I mentioned earlier, to really be the best scientist I could be, and that was important to me. Just to, growing up, the values my parents instilled in me is, did you do your best? And there was too many days where I didn't feel like I was doing my best. And so when I made that switch into policy, now I knew what doing my best, what helping people felt like, and far more other days of making a difference. I think one of the other panelists talking about making that more, I think Jiggy said, making that more immediate impact where you can see that effect. And so that value was being met, far more often and far more immediately. So I really, came into my own in DC, both personally and professionally. And I would describe those values now as that public service, or that service helping people and doing that through public service as a federal employee is really sort of the motivating force that guides me in my career.
Thank you, Matt. Clio, could you go next?
It's interesting thinking about this question because I'm trying to articulate this to myself and for job applications right now. So this is quite valuable to explain, like, how did I get from neuroscience research to climate policy and what links those things. But I would echo Matt that service is a big piece of it. Back when I was in college or grad school, that was usually like service within the university community, whether it was, sitting on a student government or a committee or being involved in different extracurriculars and organizations. And that's sort of broadened out. Like Jiggy, I got more and more involved in kind of broader volunteering or some activism, and more interested in local government and state government and how all of that worked, and more engaged with that. I think another piece of it is health, which is very much tied into, like Matt was saying, helping people. It's been really interesting this year to kind of zoom out from thinking about health on the level of an individual brain, specifically a mouse brain, which someday might have implications for a human brain, right? And now I think about public health scale interventions, like the regulations that my agency puts on the emissions of toxic pollutants from cars, right? That has huge public health implications, but it's just a totally different scale than I was thinking about before. So that's another common thread. And then something that is just something that I really like to do, but that I guess is sort of woven through, is thinking about how to make systems work effectively so that people can do good work and meet their goals. I'm that person who, in lab would write protocols for experiments and help kind of organize things in lab. And I've absolutely carried that into the policy space and just applied it in a different way to like, how can we make the office work well? Thinking about how we can make government work really effectively, good governance. So that's another thread that's continued for sure.
Thank you, Clio. I'll say, since you mentioned you're on the job market, this is also FYI for most people. If you're an alum, a year out from separation from UCSF, you can still access our office. So I'll just throw that out there. Last but not least, Jiggy, could you talk about your values and what they are and how they've influenced your career path?
Yeah, so I think I touched on this a little bit. I think the main thing when making the transition was sort of that feeling of kind of impact. I think I agree with Clio and Matt on the service piece. And I think people who are scientists clearly have that to some degree. I think the difference is sort of the time scale of the impact, right? Like, as Clio said, if you're researching a mouse brain and you hope that one day it has impact on a human brain, which will then maybe lead to some insight that will help people later, but it's not something that like feels directly connected to your day-to-day. And so I think that was one of the main, the biggest values. And it is really, if that's something that is important to you, I do think politics can have that impact. Like I worked on the Prop 17 campaign last year to expand voting rights to people coming home from prison, and like the feeling of working on that bill for 2 years and then the ballot campaign and then winning in November, like there really is no better feeling than winning, honestly. Like something that you've worked on actually happening and knowing that there is going to be impact on real people is a really like wonderful feeling. I think the other thing for me was also sort of like interacting with people a little bit more in my day-to-day work. So it's so easy when you're working in lab, you have your project and sometimes you collaborate. But a lot of times it's sort of like you and your data and you're like, with your microscope or, with your brain slices, whatever, doing your research. And of course you have lab mates, but I wanted, I think, a little bit more sort of human interaction in the day-to-day. So I was like kind of drawn towards teaching, and definitely I do is talk to people all day. Maybe I've got
Thank you.
But those are,
yes. And so this is another related question, and I'd love for Jiggy to elaborate a little bit for us. So we've heard that you have your background in neuroscience, similar to Clio, and how you had to make this transition to policy work. So could you speak on a little bit about what skill sets did your training provide to you that you use regularly, and what skills do you need to, and what skills did you need to learn?
Honestly, 100% of the things that I learned. Okay, not 100%, like 80% of the skills. So actually, when it comes to skills, I would say like a large majority. Of course, there's specific information that obviously, because I don't do like neuroscience, the topic itself, like I'm not talking about potassium channels and serotonin on a daily basis anymore. So that stuff doesn't transfer over, but the skills are absolutely invaluable. And I think there's a lot of things that people who are studying for their PhD or have their PhD take for granted, from having been in an academic environment where you're surrounded by people who also kind of have these skills, that when you look back at academia, you realize actually that's a very unique skill set. Really just the way you think, like your brain and how it operates, is a skill set that a lot of people don't have. The ability to look at a problem, know nothing about it, and then figure it out is something that you're very professionally trained to do. And that's something when I was leaving academia and I was nervous about it, that my PI told me, it was like, you're a professional learner and you're a professional problem solver. And that means that you could probably do literally anything and you would be pretty good at it. Because that fundamental skill set of being able to learn new things and being able to problem solve and figure out how to problem solve, carry out the solve problem, is a skill set that is so invaluable in any job, like literally any job, but definitely also applies here. So I think all of the critical thinking, the scientific method, all that stuff has been really useful. And then there's like very discrete skills. So I obviously do research now. So even though I'm not doing scientific research, a lot of the research skills, like looking at data, being able to understand data, being able to synthesize data, make sense of it, pull out the important pieces of it. All of my data skills are still very relevant. I also do a lot of presentations. So all of those lab meetings that I had to give have come in really, I get complimented all the time on my slides and figures because I spent a lot of time in grad school making slides and figures. So there's a lot of, and also presenting, like presenting at lab meetings, presenting at conferences, all of that transfers over into both your kind of day-to-day interactions with people, but also I have to do lots and lots of presentations as well. So there's a lot, I would say, like all of the kind of skills that are not very specific to the, like I'm not patching neurons, like that skill has not transferred over, but pretty much everything else has transferred over. And I think that it has made me much better at my job. And I think it's really sets you up for success to have sort of a PhD training. So kind of what Clio said, I feel like when I was first leaving grad school, I felt a little bit like, oh, did I just like waste this time that and I ended up switching careers and I'm not going to use my PhD, and oh, was it a waste? And it absolutely was not a waste. And I feel like it's really set me up for success in this career and like any career, really. I think there's a lot of really useful fundamental skills that transfer over.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jiggy. And before I pass it on to Mike, Matt and Clio, would you like to add anything on how your training has helped you get to this point? Or
I actually won't try to improve on Jiggy's answer. I think she was dead on. At least, from my experience, it wasn't my domain knowledge. It was being a professional learner, professional problem solver.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think another big piece of it that has been really key for my particular position this year is communication skills, and being able to sort of take complicated information and sort of synthesize it and organize it and translate it for a lot of different audiences. And that's something that I got from my research training, but also from all those other things that I was doing while I was training as a researcher. To kind of take my science out of the lab into articles for the public, or presenting to policymakers, presenting to the general public. So those kind of skills will serve you well anywhere, and they will make you really valuable in any office you end up in. And that's certainly been really central for me this year.
great. Thank you all. And the floor is yours, Mike.
Thank you, Jasmine. So maybe a bit of a shift, not too much, but for many, for students and postdocs, the only environment that they've ever worked in has been in academia, and so it's a environment that may be very familiar and comfortable, and so the prospect of completely switching out of that environment may be daunting. So can you, all three of you, speak about what is it like to work in a non-academic space, and what surprised you the most about it? So let's start, we'll go reverse alphabetical again. Let's start with Matt, and then Clio and Jiggy.
Just to comment on something you said there, Michael, and one of the other panels referred to is this, it was hard leaving, and that sort of self-stigma I mentioned earlier about, did I fail? We used the term wash out at the time. I mean, it was terrible. The way I kind of treated myself and thought about this, and it was completely wrong. In fact, some of the work I do now for the National Science Foundation, you look at the data of career paths of PhDs, and in fact, the so-called alternate careers is actually more the norm. So these are just as valuable, and so no one should ever feel or diminish taking this career path. It is totally rewarding. Your actual question is what surprised me. So, I mean, government is complicated. When you go into a meeting and people start talking in all these acronym alphabet soup, you can easily become overwhelmed. And the way I think things are portrayed on the news, especially when I was working, at the White House about presidential power in the bully pulpit, it's hasn't tracked with my experience that it's actually quite complicated, that there's power centers all over, and you have to build coalitions, you have to build relationships and networks. This sort of mythology of if somebody just pounds the table hard enough, the masses are going to be swayed. I mean, especially these days, everything is so tried, people are so, dug in. It's really difficult. And in a divided country, you need coalitions, you need voters, you need buy-in from stakeholders, especially people that don't necessarily share your values. And so you have to, learning to speak with them, learning to identify, with folks that I may not agree with one very much, and how to navigate that complexity. You sort of know it. It sounds obvious, but then you get in there and you're like, okay, wow, this is complicated. But as Jiggy and Clio said, you've got the skills to do it. So you won't be overmatched at all, and you'll be successful.
Thank you, Matt. Sorry, it's the pause of Zoom. People unmute themselves. Clio, could you answer that question as well? What surprised you about not working in a lab or in academia?
I would definitely agree with what Matt just said, that the issues are so much more complex and nuanced when you're inside government than what you read as the headline in the news. And that importance of working with a lot of different stakeholders and partners and groups that have very different priorities and very different perspectives, and trying to find a way to listen to them and honor people's needs is a very complex process, but that's what makes it really interesting. I would say another thing that's taken some getting used to, and this probably applies to going into a career in government or a big organization, is the hierarchy. Academia, of course, it varies by your lab and how your PI structures the lab. But generally speaking, I feel like academia is much more flexible and loose in terms of the lines of communication and the sort of the paths that work has to follow as it gets finalized. Whereas in a big organization like the agency I work at, this isn't true sort of in the chair's office where I work, which is perched up on top of the organization. But for the rest of the organization, it's divided into these different divisions. They each have different work. And when I'm trying to work with somebody, who's working on a particular program, they'll have to kind of feed their work product all the way up the chain of command for approval at every level. So it's just sort of time consuming. And if you're coming from academia, it's like, well, why can't we just talk directly? I know you have the information I need, can we just, make this work? But there's sort of these structures in place to make sure that everything checks out and that the work is of good quality, and that you're checking all the boxes you need to check when you are in public service and accountable to voters. So it can just be a bit more hierarchical and bureaucratic than you're used to in academia.
Jiggy.
Definitely agree on the complexity piece. There's a lot that goes into legislation getting passed, both on the government side, but then also outside the government. There's so much that goes on. And so I think that's another kind of related thing, is just how big the space is and how many different types of actors there are that are involved in this process. So we think about politicians taking votes. We see it on, on the news, but they have staff, there are committees, there are interest groups, there are nonprofits, all of these people. And at each of the nonprofits, there are different departments that do all of these different types of functions. There's communications, there's digital, there's organizing, there's lobbying, there's policy making, there's legal, there's so much in this space. And I think that was something that kind of surprised me a little bit, is just like really understanding how much goes into sort of policy making. Something that surprised me, but something that definitely was different. Like compared to a PhD, right? In a PhD, you're on your own timeline. You're doing your research, you get up, you do your work every day. And at some point you wait, but there's not, and maybe you have calls in the middle, right? But otherwise there's not really deadlines. But in politics, there are very clear deadlines. There are elections that happen every 2 years. There are, legislative sessions that convene for certain amounts of time. There are deadlines when things need to get through committee. And so even though it also moves slowly at the same time, a policy to be.
All of you, and we're transitioning to audience Q&A. So if you have a question you'd like to ask, once we're comfortable doing so, you can send the question to either myself or to Jasmine or to Jocelyn, and we can make sure that it gets asked. So Jasmine, take us home with our last question.
Yes, the last question, last but not least. So how does your current role fit in with your overall story? So are you in the position that is best fit for you right now, or is the current position like a stepping stone on your way to your overall career goal? And since we started off with Matt's last question, we'll start off with Clio.
Yeah, I somewhat surprisingly, from where I was last year, I am exactly where I want to be. What Jiggy was just saying about the pace of the work is so true. And it's kind of also true of what's happened in my career this year. I didn't know that this organization that I work for, the California Air Resources Board, existed at this time last year. I had no idea it was a thing. And now I have absolutely loved the work there. I'd love to keep working there or somewhere in the space that it works in. And I'm planning a career in climate and environmental policy now. So it's just to say that your career can kind of come together or turn a corner or take a new path quite quickly. And that can be a little alarming when you're used to the pace of academia and you're used to knowing what your next step is going to be, like a year or more out from when the change is going to happen, right? Like you might get a postdoc position and then spend another 6 months finishing your research before you transfer labs, right? So it can be weird to move that fast, but also really exciting when you land somewhere that you didn't even know about and you think, oh yeah, this feels like a great fit. And I actually can see how all these different pieces led me here, though I couldn't have predicted it.
Great. Thank you, Clio. Jiggy, do you want to go next? And then we'll have Matt finish us off.
Yeah, it's funny that what you just said, Chloe, about all of a sudden you turn a corner and you're like somewhere else and you didn't expect it. That's very much how I feel, but also feel how all my experiences have sort of led me here. Like a year ago, I was just like panicking about the election and started doing research about it, right? And in my job. And then now I'm like the executive director of this new organization. And I don't really know how it happened, except that it happened. But it really does bring a lot of my experiences together. So obviously there's the research side of it. There's also the coalition building side that I feel like I did a lot of indivisible. And then there's sort of the democracy and voting rights stuff that I did. And so it kind of does feel like it's taken all of my like past positions and kind of melded them into one position. I'm learning a ton because I've never run an organization before, like definitely like figuring it out. So there's a lot to learn on that front. I will say that I probably one thing I've learned since being an executive director is that I don't think that I want to be an executive director forever. There's a lot of parts of the job. And I think this happens a lot, probably like when you, maybe this happens when you go from being a scientist to a PI as well. I'm not sure, but you're so used to doing the work. And that then when you become sort of the director and you're not as involved in the day-to-day, you kind of miss it. And then you have to do a whole bunch of other stuff, like fundraising, which I will admit is my least favorite thing to do ever, and is somehow now a large part of what I do. And so I don't think I'm going to want to be an executive director long-term, but I'm learning a ton, and I'm definitely using the experience to just like learn more, get more management skills, and just kind of sort of like expand my skill set. And then I will figure, I'm really committed to the organization and building it out. But I do know that long-term, that specific role is probably not where I will stay forever.
Thank you, Jiggy. And last but not least, Matt.
So I feel good where I am now. I'm back at my home agency, National Science Foundation. I'm working with the Office of Director, so that offers a new challenge, a new set of people, and we're working on, developing a new policy group and kind of describe, brainstorm about what that would look like and how it would serve the director and his priorities. I don't have I want to be, X when I hit 50 kind of goal. I've been a sort of a go with the flow kind of person. As long as I feel like I'm adding value. I think as a federal employee, it's important that I don't get cynical or jaded. This is something we're all, 10, 12 years into our careers as feds, my friends and colleagues, and you start becoming that person that's always saying no, like things, well, no, we tried that. That's not going to work, and you start becoming like negative. We don't want to be that person. And we want to, be innovative and get to yes and add value and continue to challenge myself. And so I feel like I'm still experiencing that. And I'm at a little bit of a crossroads because on one hand, I had this opportunity as a federal employee to work at the White House, and there's just nothing like it. The first time I walked into the Situation Room and, thinking I'm going to be in a chair on the side, and there in the middle is a placard that says Dr. Wilson, and there's all like TV shows, right? There's like the different clocks of China and different places around the world. And so anything after that is a bit like come down from that. But at the same time, I recently just moved into a house with my girlfriend and her son and trying to start a family and a life. So my career isn't my identity anymore. I want a career that can provide and add value, but also so I have time to throw the ball with what soon will become my son. And so trying to balance that. So I'm a little bit at a crossroads now, but I am happy where I'm at. Probably too much information, but there you go.
No, definitely not too much information. We love that y'all have really been so transparent with your stories, and we really truly appreciate it. We now can open up the floor to Q&A.
And if you're listening to this as a recording, thank you for listening.